And in Syria, the Islamic State has reportedly cut the salaries of its fighters in half as the international bombing campaign against its assets in Raqqa, Syria, appears to be paying dividends. I-24 News correspondent Uri Shapira has the story.
New difficulties for the extremist jihadist group, the Islamic State, this time apparently not on the battlefield, but in a no less cruel arena, the economic one. According to an internal report by the Bait el-Mal, the Treasury Ministry of IS in Raqqa, Syria, the organization decided to cut the salaries of its fighters in half due to, quote, exceptional circumstances. The circumstances were not mentioned in the paper, but experts say that it is likely the current campaign against the IS led to this move. Last week, the US State Department released a video showing an airstrike on an IS bank in the Iraqi city of Mosul in an attack by the US coalition. In recent months, top economic officials pointed to one of their main goals in the war against terrorism, to target the financial resources of the group and by so doing destroy the flow of revenue.
Our aim is to choke off the trade in oil, to end the extortion, to prevent the sale of historic cultural artifacts, and to take the fight not just to the terrorists but to the middlemen and the traders who trade in this currency of evil.
According to IHS agency, around 43% of IS revenue comes from oil extracted in Syria and Iraq. Other sources of revenue mentioned in the report are taxation on profits, trafficking of drugs and antiquities, criminal activities, and running small enterprises such as transport companies and real estate agencies. The lifting of sanctions on Iran and the decrease of oil prices may be bad news for the IS, but experts say it is highly difficult to prevent Western countries from purchasing oil affiliated with the Islamic State, as much of it flows through third-party brokers. Another contentious area is Libya, where different rebel factions fight over oil facilities.
An optimistic scenario is that the growing threat from Islamic State will make others who have an interest in peace and stability unite to stop that threat. The pessimistic scenario is that others will be too busy competing with each other and they will ignore the threat that Islamic State poses.
This is not the first time the Islamic State is reported to be in financial difficulties. Last year, US Secretary of State John Kerry said that the Islamic State fighters in Mosul suffered a 75% cut in pay. According to a Syrian Observatory Organization report from 2014, an IS fighter earns between $400 to $1,000 a month, which is more than the Iraqi government offers to some of its employees. Now, with the new crisis, perhaps some fighters will consider career retraining.
Yes, and I'm joined now in studio by senior Middle East analyst Ali Waked. Ali, good evening. Ali, to the layman, this might sound very strange. Budget cuts in the Islamic State by the Islamic State to its fighters, but there is a logic to the Islamic State economic mechanism.
Yeah, absolutely. Recently, both the Russians and the Americans focused on the sources of revenues of the Islamic State. We saw that the Americans attacked the compound where the Islamic State had its cash, and we saw the money flying in air. The Russians are targeting the oil infrastructure of the Islamic State, especially the convoys of oil, and targeting hundreds of trucks that exported the oil to Turkey, and this is the main revenue source, the oil, and it is gravely targeted by the Russians. Plus, when we saw, as it was mentioned in your report, that the price of oil is going down, and the fact that more and more sanctions, Turkey is now less enthusiastic to make any trade with the Islamic State due to the criticism that it was addressed to even President Erdogan, and that his son was involved in this trade with the Islamic State. It is creating a certain dynamism inside the Islamic State when members are less satisfied with the fact that they are facing cuts, one. Second, we are seeing for the first time clashes local clashes still, inside the Islamic State, militants of the Islamic State, because the resources are less interesting, the resources bring less revenues, and we have fights over these revenues between different different leaders. For the moment, we cannot say that this is creating internal tension within the Islamic State, but we are seeing that the Islamic State is trying to accommodate very quickly and to try to find other places where it can gain alternative resources. In Libya, for example, with the oil camps of Libya and with the relatively free ways and tracks to have access to arms. And we are seeing, Ayman, yesterday we talked about Deir ez-Zor and the very tough offensive that the Islamic State is carrying on in Deir ez-Zor. In Deir ez-Zor, they are now publishing in the last hours that they took control of some anti-craft missiles launchers that they put their hands on in this attack, which means that we are expected to see more atrocities from the Islamic State in order to try, to pay, instead of paying for these missiles, to try to gain them fighting on the ground against the Syrian and against the Iraqis.
Yes, they say need is the mother of all invention, apparently need to terrorize others as well. Ali Waked, thank you very much for being with us tonight.